most early growth had already unfurled and flowered. The changes of the seasons in this Ozark country really hit me hard. I was used to the dun, dirt ugliness of oil fields and defense sites. The rolling farmland of my eastern Kansas birthplace could be lush, but I remember mainly bodark hedges, creek-bottom timber, green field crops in a good year, and an oriole swinging its bag-like nest from an elm branch over the cistern. After the slush pits, stinking gas flares, and thumping oil well pumps of East Texas, our family stays in the deep south, and on Alabama tidewater delighted me. Sand springs and jessamine, palmettos and savannas, cypress and longleaf pines, moss-draped live oaks and azalea gardens. But spring in those areas seemed only 2 weeks between dank winter and steamy summer. Spring really began for me only here, when I was opening up too, just as the pale green hands of wild iris blades rose beside rocky watercourses, each sheaf shielding its trembling tricolor bloom, too exotic for anywhere but a greenhouse. The dark, loose soil of the riverbank showed all the array of violets from Confederate gray to yellow, plus pristine bloodroot, pink Dutchman's breeches, spring beauties, phlox, hepatica. Even the steep wintry ridge slopes had lost a starburst bloom of plum and serviceberry, redbud and dogwood, and spangled themselves with dots of color from white and yellow adder's tongue, crowfoot violet, wild vetch vines. After 4 seasons, all of this was magical to me. Now I could recognize plants and flowers, but I didn't know their actual names. In my wandering family, we noted the seasons by how work, weather, and foraging affected us. Returning warmth and fishing, poke salad and sassafras tea signaled spring. Wild berries and garden vegetables, summer. Nuts, wild game, and runny noses, fall and winter. Only one Christmas celebration, 1936, stands out, funded by a $5 bill. Although Vida always managed some gesture for the little ones. For me, this annual rebirth in a largely unscarred natural terrain was all my holidays in one. An unspoken dream grew slowly in me of finding a gray-eyed life love and living here forever. Where the railroad squeezed against a river ridge, we cut over to the island channel's banks and gravel bars, willow, alder, and witch hazel clumps. "That's Indian turnip," Jack said, pointing at a pale green tube of jack-in-the-pulpit under a tangle of green catbrier. "You ever tasted the root? It's good." He wasn't catching me on that one. I'd seen older boys pretend to eat a slice and give a piece to younger ones who wound up furiously spitting to get the burning taste out. As we stood there, a spicy, sweet scent entered around us from a late-blooming witch hazel clump, its crinkling yellow blooms fading as pleated leaf tips pushed out. We only talked and rambled that day. Not bothering to drag out my hidden boat, the one I'd hammered out of a metal Coke sign my first winter there, we hopped back onto the railway spur and went as far as a round barn below the island. Of course, we had to go inside its gray cone, staring up at the dazzling light stars that leaked through the cupped oak shingles. It was only an empty hay shelter, a steep witch hat of shingles set over 4-skin tree trunks with pole rafters and purlins and a low wall for support. What's the mystery in that? Yet we found mystery in it. Words can't match experience. They can't regain a time when each instant came pregnant and spontaneous, fresh. We were bursting with hunger and teetering on the edge of discovery, happy to be out and roaming at a wonderful time and place. When the afternoon waned, we split up. Jack and I climbed a steep draw to the ridge-top pasture back of his family's cabins, while Harold waved and headed up the rails toward the dam. But we made a pact to come back after school let out to try foraging off the land like Indians. At last, T.M. found work, lots of it, he said, but 100 miles down the river in a rich flatland town. After this brief visit, he'd be gone longer, but promised to stay in touch and send money. Before he left, we hiked down to the tail of the island for a final fishing jaunt. We got down the shortcut draw late and cast for a time with no sign of a strike or even a follow. But once the generators at the dam were off, making the flow seem nearly normal, the water was not so achingly frigid. It got late. The sun hung low and blood red, and gray worms of evening mist began crawling off the water. All at once, fish started to move everywhere, slashing the water in a frenzy. This was strange. Lately, the icy water had made all fish sullen and moody. I quickly snapped on a frog pattern topwater lure and began to catch heavy bass while Dad landed them. On the 4th fish, my bamboo casting rod splintered. T.M. swiftly whipped on a splint with fishing line. I caught one more, breaking the rod completely. Then the last red gleam of sun vanished and everything stopped. Dad cut a green hickory rod to carry the fish and hung them on his shoulders, a heavy load, and we climbed the draw in the dusk. We had a big fish fry, and Dad went off to work in the low country. On the next Saturday, my school buddies and I hiked up the curving access road to the end of the dam, shortening the climb by running up on the dam's drain gutters and even dashing up onto the lower concrete apron as well. Once at the overlook, we walked onto the roadbed top and hung on the railing above the curved steel floodgates, gazing down at white water surging out of the powerhouse by the grid of baffles. Then we crossed to look over the sprawling mirror of the lake pool with its distant blue ridges and inlets. At times, the whinny of an outboard motor reached us. We walked onto the east end where the concrete met a vertical rock face. Still, it was easy for active guys to do what Harold did every day, climb atop the lakeside safety rail, balance, and then jump onto the slope of the ridge. We scrambled up through bushes and trees, then scouted around the steep knob overhanging the drop to the river. This was my first time back on this side since the January when we'd arrived. I stopped to stare down at the powerhouse, tucked against the dam's base like an architect model. Then Harold shouted. We hurried to where he crouched, peering into a low cave under a ledge. Stuffed inside were plain pine boxes stamped with red lettering. Hercules 60% super gelatin extra. The tops were off, revealing brown sausage roll cylinders and gleaming copper capsules clamped to coils of insulated wire. We knew this was dynamite and electric blasting caps from the dam, but why was it here? Was it to blast the roadbed to this end of the dam, or had someone hidden it to carry off later? I had a sneaky thrill fingering the rolls and caps, messing with the dangerous and forbidden. The others said they'd like to take some next time, go way off and try it out. This sounded really stupid to me. And how would we send a spark through the wire? Still, I said nothing. Luckily, someone moved it in the interim. When we came back, the cave was empty, a great relief. Then on the ride home one day, Jack slipped off the pickup's bumper. I was alongside but didn't see it. One minute we bore out our noses in the breeze as the truck climbed away from the river valley. The next, Jack was down on his knees in the blurry gravel, clutching the bumper desperately. Then he let go and flopped sideways. Instantly, the rest of us jumped off. Bob and Harold did it right and lit running. I kind of bounced and skinned one leg a little but didn't let on. Jack was standing but really hurt, both pants legs shredded and knees and shins bloodied. His face was white, otherwise he showed nothing. The pickup had gone steadily out of sight. Later the girls told us they'd yelled and pounded on the cab, but the driver didn't react. When he stopped at Salesville, they told him he didn't come back. After we'd hoofed it the mile or so to Salesville Junction, there sat the pickup. Maybe he was giving us a lesson. He just glanced back and drove off immediately. Bob's house was near, so he said goodbye and ran off. Up the road, we could see the pickup stopped and Lilybeth climbing out. We three started down the road to the dam, poor Jack limping badly as the abraded and bloodied places stiffened up. As we neared Jack's family cabins, Harold waved and ran on, since he'd stayed out of concern and had lots farther to go. Jack hobbled up his drive, and I turned off opposite. I dreaded Vida's reaction to the rip of my new khakis. As it happened, she never noticed, but brushed aside my news and flattened me with the unexpected. "You better quit hanging around that little town," she shouted. "I've seen those kids in that juke joint, that Lilybeth wagging her fanny, jitterbugging all over the place. You'll come home with a hot dick. That'll what will happen to you." Both the words and the charge simply stunned me. In our 9 years together, I'd never heard her talk that way. My ripped pant leg and shin scrape were minor now. I whirled and headed for my private haunt to ponder the injustice. Sure, girls had attracted me for years, at least since I turned 12, 11, 10. But I'd never done anything about it, and I'd never set foot in that noisy cafe on Norfolk's Main Street, just glanced through the screen door with its Wonder Bread logo as I walked past once at noon. Besides, I was wary and turned aside coded invitations from girls I didn't like. One from a sharp-chinned girl who smoked in the school truck, one from an older girl in Harrison, one from a neighbor girl at Ellis. I say coded because the basic message was the same. Gee, I'm alone or bored or scared, and come on over and we'll have fun. I already had heard of boys and girls with early baby trouble, and I knew for sure I wasn't ready for that, even if sexual hunger did plague me. My private den was now the house trailer, parked under trees near the cowshed and used for storage. I went in and pulled one of my treasures from hiding, a pulp fiction magazine, Shocking Adventures, rescued from the burn pit where Vida had tossed it. The cover in stark red, black, and green showed a jungle swamp scene with a man and woman in ripped scraps of clothing fighting off a horde of huge hairy spiders leaping at them from all sides. The issue fell open easily to my sole interest, an illustration of a kneeling blonde girl, nude. This was my magnet, not the story with it, which I'd scanned then ignored. Only by looking closely could one tell that all features of the girl figure, even the eyes, were made of dots like printing pixels that were actually tiny human skulls. I still burned from Vida's unfair charge. Now, merely staring at this image created an emotional firestorm in me, a swirling mass of puzzlement with eddies of fear, indignation, desire. This was a tormenting riddle. What did the threat of danger and death have to do with a pretty naked girl form? Were women and girls really deadly as well as sweet, mysterious, and life-giving? My mother left me at 4 when she divorced Dad, but she gave me life and strength first. So far, women have mainly been the element of my life to save, nurture, and advise me, not men. TM taught me to hunt and fish and how to behave around adults. He was always courtly to women. But that was all. I could tell good girls from bad, and I yearned deeply for a girl lover like the one in the drawing, without the skulls, of course. Jack got over his hurts, and we had more outings, once to the lake overlook on a moonlit night, sprawled around a tiny campfire on the clean shattered rock of the quarry site. A whippoorwill called tirelessly from a point across the water, a musical counterpoint to our musings on the coming summer vacation. The other two had no definite plans. I'd already read much of the small school library's adventure fiction, was halfway through Raphael Sabatini's The Sea Hawk, and had some scheme of building a small boat to sail on the lake. Mostly, I recall the feeling of utter serenity and security, solitude. The dark monolith of the dam lay a short distance off, the spaced glow of its roadbed lamps mirrored on the water. Beside that, no other lights in the landscape but the moon and our flicker of fire. I can see the glow outlining forms and faces, feel the faint airs fluttering along my cheeks, smell the ghostly cedar smoke, sense that spaced bird cry measure off night and time. At some point way late, maybe urged with the night chill, we simply rose, kicked out the fire, and walked off. On our next outing, we hiked back to the abandoned Major Chapman place on the summit above where we'd found the runaway Jennies. A narrow blue arm of the lake occupied the steep hollow beyond the house and orchard. This is where Mr. Banks had once led the whole grade school for an Easter picnic. On that mild, sunny day, we lounged in the deep grass of the yard, faced away from the blank openings of the hewn log house. This time we talked of our futures after graduation, chewing on redtop stems, as we gazed southwest at the dark blue hills of Stone County. At the foot of those hills lay the railroad and the larger river. Somewhere down those rails, all roads converged on the state capitol, where busy city folk made headlines in our county paper. Jack and Harold wondered what it would be like out there, the world we heard of on the radio. No one guessed that events might reach in to grab us, much as the war, the dam building, and my dad's ways had brought my family to Baxter County. In truth, I was the one who had years of experience of the world outside, and I deeply preferred this one. But I never once mentioned my bad memories of the oil fields and living poor in strange places to temper my friends' dreams. Jack was from only a few miles away, but was bright and quick. I knew little of Harold either, but was sure that with his warm presence and natural grasp of any situation, he'd do well anywhere. I chattered away and daydreamed with him like we'd all grown up together. That session, as usual, filled some need beyond the mere youthful and gregarious, seemed to blow away my cloud of uncertainty. I felt refreshed and recharged when we set out for our homes as day died. And then, some weeks after school ended, we three went back to the island area, not knowing it would be the last time. Harold had helped me carry up the wash water. The whole country wore the delicate shades of spring. Now heavy, mature foliage thrust, draped, dangled, and swayed everywhere. Fuzzy and pale on sycamores, blue-green, glossy and stiff on oak and hickory, tender heart shapes on linn, mulberry, and redbud. Wild grapes, woodbine, trumpet vine, and poison ivy clung and swung. A thermal fit might flip a frond to show silvery undersides, but mostly a steady steam of growth breathed everywhere. We hurried to the railroad and turned downstream, eager to test our subsistence skills. In the shady woods along the river channel, orange touch-me-not blooms dangled from translucent stems, and bright fire pink stood stiff and bold. Near the round barn, a plot of early field corn was already in the milk stage. We glanced warily around, then spread the shucks enough to dent a kernel with a thumbnail. "I think it's Hickory King," Jack said. "They grow it for hominy because it's big and white." With our stolen corn, we cut over to the tangled thicket across from the island tip, dragged out my battered metal canoe, and settled in it gingerly and took a scavenger cruise around the big pool. We wanted something tasty to go with the roasted corn. I thought of crossing over to Otter Creek and hunting crawdads to boil. I loved it over there. A strong column of spring water shot up through a gravel bed just off the creek mouth, bulging above the river pool. More than once, wade fishing, I had bent drunk from that eye of cold clarity. This day, overloaded and tippy with 3 of us, it seemed risky. But with my best silent paddling, we coasted up to one luckless turtle that failed to plop off its log with the others. In one flashing move, Harold snatched it and dropped it in the bow, where it scrabbled helplessly. We landed and built a fire near the water, then searched for more food, finding a few hard red dewberries near the railroad. Still, Jack and Harold turned and toasted our corn ears in the hot ashes while I boiled the turtle in the bailing can. In no way was it a good survival trial. Each one made the most of his ear of corn and nibbled tentatively at a tough turtle leg. Yet we were together with the sound of breaking water from a nearby rapid and bathed with the light and day of an expanding summer's day. Light and air. What we actually did never mattered much at that time when even bursting effort with joy. Like other times, we talked and laughed non-stop. Jack and I choked and laughed in a stumbling recital of our January adventure when we made a canoe run the length of the island. Whooping and paddling fast, fearing a fallen tree across the channel, we reached the final rapid but caught a willow stub and swung sideways. We leaned wrong upstream and water poured in, panicking Jack. He leapt from the bow into the shallow, shoving me and the broached craft to the bottom of the pool. For icy seconds, I'd stared up at the surface before ripping out a thwart and popping to the top like a cork. I dragged the boat out by the painter rope and we hiked home fast up the draw with the ice crackling on our clothes. We laughed even more over last fall's duck shoot off the island tip. Jack hid behind drift logs while I skimmed about in the canoe, setting out my crude decoys. I heard Jack hiss, "Here they come," and glanced up to see a dozen mallards beating upstream fast, low and straight at us. As they flared, I raised TM's Ivor Johnson 12 gauge, heedless of the boat's drift, and let fly. The blast rolled me on my side in a foot of mud and water. We used the hours fully until slanted light told us home and chore time beckoned, then went our ways. Jack and I climbed the draw. Harold waved and headed up the rusty rails. Then everything changed, at least for Jack and me. Big Jack, that black-haired friendly giant, died suddenly, forcing Jack and his family to move back to Calico Rock near Ken. I suppose Harold stayed home or got some summer job. I know my life was wiped clean with companionship. I never saw either before my family was taken away. By that time, Ellis was swallowed in vines and bushes. With no one my age nearby, I began to run the quarter-mile up to Salesville to talk with Mr. Jensen, the older farmer who brake plowed our garden plot. He and his kindly wife had an unpainted farmhouse just beyond the grade school. This slow-moving, laconic man had earned a reputation for total honesty and plain dealing. With TM gone, maybe I craved some fatherly pattern. My visits became truly urgent when his nieces came by bus for a summer visit. 2 identical twin girls, just my age, auburn hair, dimpled, fine skin. They dazzled me, running barefoot after him in short red checkered cotton dresses, probably sewn by mother from flour sacking, helping with chores and laughing like it was the most fun in the world. I doubled my visits, but then they had gone until next summer, Mr. Jensen said, a twinkle in his eye. My shame at being so obvious made me stop going by. Now life seemed even more aimless. I went farther up the road to pester Bob and Lilybeth. They were older, but humored me, even took me to their lower horse pasture to fish in their spring-fed brook, a tumbling clear flow from cold fingers of water dribbling in from mint beds and limestone outcrops. A bay and a gray trotted to meet us, eager for company. The water was so clear it magnified, the fish so innocent they picked up my home-tied flies like live bait. I'd used up all my fine nylon leader strands, so for tippets, I tied on horsehairs from the tail of the dapple gray. I'd read of someone doing this who claimed a strand would test a quarter pound. I turned loose all I caught. I went back once by myself and then never again. The fish were so unwary it was no contest. Besides, it was Bob's and Lilybeth's special place. But I always kept the image of big green sunfish and red-eyed bass in foamy pools. I did return to the river one final time, very depressing. A few fish hung sullenly in the mouths of the feeder streams while the icy currents from the turbines rushed by and cold mist hovered low above. Plainly, warm water fishery was finished in those miles below the dam outflow. I walked home angry and frustrated. I'd seen no sign of native fish in the river for some time. Back in my room, I seized pencil and paper and wrote a note to the State Game and Fish Commission, suggesting that since the Corps of Engineers dam created this stretch of sterile water, the state might imitate TVA, tailwater fisheries, and stock trout, as I'd read they had done. That would be some compensation. Then I mailed it, but I never got a reply, either because we had already left the area or perhaps they didn't bother. In the following days, my life sank to another level. Lingering at the house became painful because Vida now turned openly hostile. I couldn't think why, unless I reminded her of TM, now absent quite a while without sending either word or money. Her manner told me that my presence offended her deeply. She even refused to meet my gaze. I grew more upset and puzzled. She seemed fine with her own children. But then as I came in from milking one evening, she snarled, "Give me that, you," and yanked at the pail, throwing milk over both of us, since my reflex had made me hold back. I stood there with milk dripping off face and arm with no inkling of how I'd caused this. My brief resistance had clearly made it worse. After that, unsure of what to do, I shifted from one place to another. After carrying up the day's water in the morning, I'd often linger at the spring's outflow to stare at my dim reflection or study the topwater minnows, the tiny newts, the stalk-eyed crawfish. I felt isolated and vaguely guilty, thrown back on the mere question of existence. What would happen next? On a summer evening of great clarity, I raised my arms toward the paired image of the crescent moon and Venus in admiration and maybe some formless appeal. Tiring of one place, I'd shift to another, to the calf pen, the trailer, or I'd cross the road and pad past the vacant cabins of Jack's family and into the unused pasture atop the river ridge. There I'd slump on a sandstone slab, shaded by chinkapin clump, to worry away the afternoon. What would become of us? What was Dad doing all this time? Had he forgotten us? We still had some canned food and got a few vegetables from the garden. The cow gave a quart or two. What would happen when that ran out? Across the pasture, another level cap rock jutted out like a ramp, a vantage point, where every afternoon I stood to look down on the river island area, once my joy. Now I only stared at the past. I'd lost all desire to go there. The ramp rock stuck out like a tongue. Once, in an attempt to break my aimlessness, I tried to scale it from below and wound up trapped and clinging until I slithered back to safety like a snake. But then the fruitcake came. Daily I hoped for a letter from TM, so from the pasture I listened at the expected time for the postman's truck. One day I heard it pause so briefly I wasn't sure, but went to the house anyway. What I saw when I stepped in froze me. Vida and my two young brothers sat around the table, each with a pie pan, busily reducing hunks of fruitcake to crumbs. My stepmother said nothing, focused on the task, her lips compressed. But little Bill glanced up cheerfully and said, "We're looking for razor blades, Jay." Instantly, cold fingers squeezed my scalp and back. I recognized what I should have seen earlier, that Vida was slipping out of control. Years later, I tried to sum up the sources of Vida's instability: stresses as a child, anti-feminism in her working life, a paranoid tendency, and more immediately possible postpartum complications from a miscarriage earlier that spring. At that time, TM sent me over the ridge with the 4 children, telling me to keep them away as long as possible. 2 older women came to the house, and an older girl stayed on to help for 2 weeks. When I had to bring the children back at last for food and water, nothing was ever explained. Of course, as a 15-year-old confronted with a fruitcake incident, I knew only that I must do something. In that more innocent era, even I could see that someone's kindly gesture had backfired, triggering Vida's action. I quickly went to my room and wrote another plea to Dad. Since I never saw the letter again, after so many years, I can recall only that I described the scene and near the end used the phrase, "If you still care what happens to us." And then I mailed it. There was nothing harmful in the fruitcake. I tasted it and ate a bit myself. Like locusts, the children devoured it in a day, laughing as they ran in and out to cram their fists with crumbs. I looked carefully at the container and wrappings. It had been a small round cake in a round decorated tin, wrapped in clear confectionery paper. I saw no sign of address, stamps, or outer wrapping. I'm sure a neighbor, probably the Blacks, had simply handed it to the mail carrier to give to us. Vida would say nothing to me about it. On the day following the cake episode, I was watching by the southeast corner of the house near the big black oak and the yard swing. In order to observe, I needed to be close but unseen. I had a sense of urgency, but no plan at all except to stay near because the family mattered, even this dysfunctional one. A rapid movement caught my eye as I stood there. It was my favorite dog of our two, Brownie, seemingly coming from Fayetteville. This blocky little animal was the family mascot for most of our wandering years. One night in Harrison, while my parents were away, he attacked and drove off a sneak thief trying to break in. Lately, he'd been my chief comfort, something to pet when I felt low. As the dog trotted up the slope, he began slowing, sagging, and gasping. He reached me and fell at my feet in convulsions. I hunched over him, frantically calling his name, straining to hold his thrashing legs. He went into stronger paroxysms, stretching and contracting violently while bloody urine shot from his body. In only a minute, he made his final stretch and was still. This was clearly poisoning. This was clearly poisoning, possibly a trick of Zach the sadist, but I didn't think of that, just stood over the warm body, blinded and choking. At last I faced reality and went to fetch the mattock. I carried the heavy, smooth, muscled form uphill and buried it at the foot of a stately pine. I don't remember telling anyone. I may have felt there was no one to tell. After that, I went around half-dazed, did my chores automatically, lost track of time. I gave up watching Vida, accepted our routine contact. She seemed normal with her own children. I'm not sure I was. In an apathetic funk, I went back to my chinkapin clump, watching and listening for the postman. It may have been 3 days later, or maybe 4, as I sat through another baky afternoon, that a shocking roar from the river valley shook the whole area. An airplane, and terribly low. I ran full speed over the crisp pasture grass and straight out to the Ramp Rock's tip. Squinting down through the heat waves, I saw a bright yellow airplane like a butterfly on green baize, sitting motionless and empty on the island hayfield. Something was happening, but what? Did it affect us? I turned and ran fast along the ridge toward the steep draw to the river. As I neared it to go down, my father's fast-moving form rose out of it. A grinning crop duster pilot followed, swinging his leather helmet. Dad had a funny look, almost angry. He never slowed, but jarred my shoulder hard in passing and rapped out, "That was some letter." Then he and the pilot cut across the pasture toward our house. I trotted close behind. Along with my relief, I sensed great changes looming. 2. Interim.